Welcome to Waters World. I'm Jesse Waters. A New York state of mind, that's the subject of tonight's Waters Words. We live in the United States of America. There's 50 states in the Union. But if you're in the media, there's only one state that matters, New York. But we don't live in the United States in New York. The media thinks we do because they all live there. Now, I live there too. It's an amazing place. But New York isn't America. And New York doesn't know what's best for America. And frankly, I'm sick of the New York media lecturing America like we all live in Manhattan. The coronavirus didn't attack any other state the way it attacked New York. But we all responded like it did. I understand why. Mitigation works, and we flattened the curve. Most states did great, and some didn't. But this is a very New York metro area situation. They got hammered. 8 million people in a densely populated city, subways, buses, Ubers, the whole thing. Crowded buildings and streets, packed high-rises and tenements. Big elderly population. You got JFK Airport right there with international flights landing all day. Tens of thousands of frontline workers and high minority populations who sadly have a higher rate of pre-existing conditions. It's a perfect storm for the virus. But the New York media can't understand why the rest of America isn't ready to shelter in place for months and months and months. The numbers explain it. America has over 50,000 coronavirus fatalities. It's a true tragedy. New York has over 20,000 of those fatalities. New Jersey has around 5,000. So New York and New Jersey have half the virus deaths in America. Look at these numbers. 5 of the top 10 deadliest states are in the Northeast. Look at the other side. Some of these states have death tolls in the single digits. For a number of reasons, they're in fantastic shape. Now look at the number of cases. New York has 250,000 cases. That's nearly half of all the cases in the country, basically surrounding one city. And look at the other states. A few hundred cases. These states want to get back to work, and they should, safely. People need to work to eat. But the selfish New York media, they don't understand that, and they wag their finger at them.
People are suffering from cabin fever, and honestly, I can't think of any disease right now that could be worse than that.
And those people are out there complaining because they don't have haircuts? Who the hell do you think you are?
People are getting restless, especially people who aren't too bright. And they want to die, and they're taking us down with them.
What is it that they're trying to channel here? Is this sort of neo-Confederacy?
What's motivating this administration when it comes to these rolling reopenings? Is it health? Is it the economy? Or is it the election in November?
You want to call yourself protesters, leave your guns home. Those are terrorists.
This is exactly why they're called the elite media. They're out of touch with the entire country, basically. The country doesn't have a death wish. Millions of Americans must leave the house to live. The media is still going to get paid to work from home. Same with all their friends. But millions of Americans don't get paid to stay home. And they can't understand why, for instance, Nashville, Tennessee, would start opening up. Well, because Nashville has 24 deaths, and New York has over 20,000. See? People there need to get back to work safely. Suicides, alcoholism, domestic abuse, child abuse calls, they're all way up. Depression's up. Bankruptcies are skyrocketing. 30 million people lost their job. They're losing their family business. If you keep things closed much longer, there won't be any business to welcome workers back. And the New York governor, Andrew Cuomo, was asked about the urge to work. Listen.
You want to go to work? Go take a job as an essential worker. Do it tomorrow. Right? You're working.
I am.
You're an essential worker. So go take a job as an essential worker.
But the people aren't hiring because of the
No, there are
pandemic.
people hiring. You can get a job as an essential worker. So now you can go to work and you can be an essential worker and you're not going to kill anyone.
You know, he's speaking for New Yorkers, but he still just doesn't get it. His state got rocked by this virus. It didn't have any stockpiles. He was begging for ventilators, and he got them. He was begging for beds, and he got them. But he was making nursing homes accept COVID-19 patients. Seriously, nursing homes. He'd send patients in there with body bags. And the nursing home population was decimated. The governor's working very hard, but he's made a lot of mistakes. You know, the guy running the state with the highest death toll, he's treated like a god in the media, though. Look, check this quote out. America's governor. Okay. The golden governor. Really? I mean, he drew a tough hand, but the guy isn't golden. And then there's Bill de Blasio, who's telling everybody to wear a mask. And 2 days later, just strolls around without one. In March, the state told everybody, don't go to the gym. What does he do? Of course, he goes to the gym. And look at George Stephanopoulos. He actually has coronavirus, and we hope he gets better, but George is walking around with his mask off. I'm tired of these New York know-it-alls and hypocrites lecturing states that have the virus under control and lecturing Americans who need to leave their house for a paycheck. We all came together after 9/11, and we should be doing it again now. America's flattened the curve. The task force says the worst is behind us as long as we stay vigilant. And we'll be able to open up slowly and safely in phases. And this week, some states started to dip their toes in the water. Earlier, I spoke to White House Coronavirus Response Coordinator, Dr. Deborah Birx. The Vice President said the other day that Memorial Day, which is basically in a month, we will have turned the corner on this virus and will be in a much, much better place. Is that your assumption as well?
We believe that both the hospitalizations, the ICU need, and frankly the number of people who have succumbed to this disease will be dramatically decreased by the end of May. The cases are a different issue because now as we're expanding more and more testing, and remember our testing was very much prioritized to people who really needed it for decision making, to people who were in the hospital, people who were sick, frontline responders and nurses. As we expand testing more and more into the greater community with much less symptoms, we'll see cases and additional cases, but we believe that those will be identifying the cases that may have been and are currently circulating in the community, but maybe in that more asymptomatic or very mild state that we really want to understand.
So how costly was it that the Chinese government wasn't open and honest with us in the very beginning? It must have been, what, a month, 2 months that we lost because of the Chinese?
You know, I think there are legitimate questions that need to be posed about what did the epidemic really look like in China. I still can't tell you that. I can't tell you how many people were infected, how many people were asymptomatic. I think all that we've been really told are the limited number of cases and the limited mortality, which doesn't match any other expansive epidemic for the first time this virus sees a population. So we need to understand, were they genetically unique, or was there a lack of transparency in reporting?
It's a very diplomatic answer, and I can read between the lines, and I appreciate your honesty. Some criticism from some precincts says that the president does not listen to science and was too slow in confronting this virus. Do you agree with that or not?
Well, I arrived on the scenes the 2nd of March, and I can tell you throughout those 7.5 weeks, every piece of data that we get to him, he looks at, he talks through, he asks questions, and he asks questions that shows that he understands the data. We have to understand, public health charts are very much like economic charts, and so he has a strong foundation in data in general, and so being able to explain to him what's happening in the United States, county by county, and he really likes to see the data in a very disaggregated way. He wants to know what's happening happening at the county level, at the community level, at the state level, and what's happening globally. So he's assured them that we're learning from others as they move through this. And we get reports daily on how the other countries are handling opening up, and we're tracking very closely how the states are doing as they open up their economies. And that's integrating that data every day for the president and vice president. The health and safety of Americans was his #1 interest and responsibility, and that's what he did first and continues to do as we begin to open up.
You probably never imagined you'd be doing this much television. You're doing network, you're doing cable, you're doing print. You're basically there every day during these task force briefings in front of the press corps. Do you believe that?
And I think the responsibility that the press has is to really ensure that the headlines reflect the science and data that is in their piece itself.
Dr. Birx, thank you so much for everything you're doing to keep everybody healthy and clean and safe, and we're grateful for your service.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
China and America on a collision course, but will Democrats unite against the communist threat? Steve Bannon on deck. And later, a Waters World, America uniting against the Chinese communists. Take a look at this. 9 in 10 Americans now view China as a threat. This is up big time from just 2 years ago. 2/3 of Americans now view China negatively. That's also up pretty big. And the feelings are pretty much bipartisan. Almost all Republicans and most Democrats agree. Get the trade war, human rights abuses, Chinese pollution, and now the coronavirus cover-up have dramatically darkened Americans' views. Our problem isn't with the Chinese people, it's with the Chinese regime. America and China are on a dangerous collision course, and our politicians need to wake up and oppose the pandemic on its weak side. And we were willing to show understanding for that. After all, every system has its weaknesses. This lie went all over the world, in the Middle East, in Africa, and the CIA, they're now saying China was sending us text messages with fake news in them, trying to scare us and divide us during the pandemic. But America can't be divided. We need to unite. It's a matter of life and death. Joining me now, former Trump White House chief strategist and host of the War Room Pandemic radio show, Steve Bannon, who's been warning about China for almost a decade, it seems like. Steve, do you think America, including Democrats, have the stomach for this fight?
We have to have the stomach for this fight, and I think we do, Jesse. I think it's very clear. This is a fight for freedom. Remember, this is the Chinese people are the innocent victims. This is about a totalitarian regime, every bit as brutal, every bit as cold-blooded, every bit as tough as the Nazis in the 1930s. They've got to be confronted. Right now, we're in an information and economic war, and this is a hot war, as you just laid out. You know, in your opening monologue, you talked about New York City. Let's think about it for a second. New York was such a hot spot because of JFK, because of the travel coming in from China. The Chinese quit. They went around the world and vacuumed up all the PPE, knowing that they would need it, and later they could use it as leverage against countries. When President Trump stopped travel, and that's what kept even New York would have been 10 times worse if he had not stopped travel from China on January 31st. Joe Biden took the side of Beijing. He took the side of the totalitarian dictators, saying this was xenophobic and nativist. And so I think the Democratic Party, particularly the Bernie people, the economic nationalists, the labor union, the working class people, particularly in the upper Midwest, that are old school, hardcore labor Democrats, understand what the Chinese Communist Party did with the slave labor in China. This is about the freedom of the Chinese people. We have to confront it. We don't have a choice. This is this generation's call to destiny. We have to confront this, and we have to beat it.
During the Cold War, you had a full mobilization in this country against the Russians. I mean, to a certain extent, but Hollywood was on our side. You know, you had movies against the Russians. Every Russian was a bad guy. You had Rocky, you had Rambo, you had all that stuff. What I'm afraid of now is that these parent companies, these movie houses, these studios, they're too much in business with China. They wouldn't make a Chinese guy the bad guy in any motion picture because they're afraid to offend them, because they know they'll just pull the rug out of any distribution deal in that country with billions of people there. How do you fight an enemy that you're so economically entrenched with? Because we weren't like that with Russia.
Look, it's not like in bed. It's not like in business. They're in bed. The financial community, the corporate community, and particularly the media. A couple of years ago, the movie Red Dawn that had to be pulled before it was released and kind of redone so as not to insult the Chinese Communist Party. Look, remember, we had a place in the Cold War was about rapprochement, détente, getting along with them. And Ronald Reagan came along and said, hey, how about this? We win, they lose. That's the attitude that we've got to take today, and I think you're seeing it. That Pew Research, Jesse, was shocking. And I tell you who it shocked the most. The totalitarian dictators, the gangsters in Beijing, see the American people coming together. This is what's going to unite us. This is the new fight for freedom, to free the Chinese people, to break the firewall. Once they get their freedom, they're going to overthrow this dictatorship. And I got to tell you, that's what's going to lead the world into peace and prosperity, is the removal of the Chinese Communist Party.
Yeah, that's going to be tough to cleave the people away from the Chinese Communist Party. It's going to take a lot of work. So we have our work cut out for us. Steve, thanks very much, and thanks for talking about this on the radio. And you've been talking about it for years. And you know, let's just keep banging this drum, because I think more and more people are starting to wake up. I really appreciate your insight.
Thanks for having me on, Jesse.
Coming up, we continue the search for the origin of the Chinese coronavirus, a Watters World wet market investigation. That's next. As Watters World's been reporting, there are two theories basically on how the coronavirus originated in China. One, researchers were accidentally contaminated by an infected bat at a sloppy Wuhan lab. Or two, the virus jumped from animals to humans at a Wuhan wet market, where wildlife is slaughtered and sold. But bats weren't sold at the Wuhan wet markets, according to Fox sources. Perhaps there was a connection between the lab leak and the wet market. We just don't know, because the communist Chinese won't let our scientists into the country. Either way, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo is demanding China shut down these risky wet markets permanently. Beatles legend Paul McCartney even agrees.
It wouldn't be so bad if this was the only thing that it seems like you can blame on those wet markets. It seems like, you know, SARS and avian flu and all sorts of other stuff that's afflicted us. Let's hope that they will say, okay, guys, we've really got to get super hygienic around here, you know. It's a little bit medieval, eating bats.
Joining me now, someone who's actually been to Chinese wet markets, Peter Lee, an associate professor of East Asian politics at the University of Houston downtown. All right. Dr. Lee, I'm seeing here they're slaughtering and they're selling eels and snakes and rats and alligators, scorpions, and dogs. Why are they doing that at these markets?
That's a good question. Good to be here. I would say, you know, you mentioned about the bats not being sold on the Wuhan market. Bats do not need to be sold on Wuhan markets for, you know, the virus to be transferred to wild animals sold on Wuhan market, you know, because the wild animals could be transported from, you know, South China and sent to Wuhan, and before being transported to Wuhan, the animals may have already been, you know, infected, you know, by, you know, such as bat feces, and or a snake may have, you know, eaten a bat. So, you know, it doesn't need to be, you know, bats to be sold. Now, China's wild
That's interesting. So you're saying before the wildlife goes to the wet market, it could have been in contact with the bat that had the virus and then made its way there, and it could have been then some other animal could then have been consumed by a Chinese customer. All right, go ahead.
Exactly. You know, actually, we are focusing too much attention on wildlife marketing. Now, live marketing, wet marketing, as a matter of fact, that two other pieces which are also equally dangerous, which is wildlife breeding. China has the world's biggest wildlife breeding operation, breeding, millions of wild animals, captive bred, and also large number of animals has to be shipped over great distances to like Wuhan and other cities. So transport and breeding, those are another two pieces that the pandemic or epidemic could broke out.
Right. So we all understand how risky and dangerous the handling of this animal and these animals are in these markets. Why don't they just shut them down? Why do they have to have these extremely dangerous wet markets? Because obviously they're at risk for virus transmission.
That's a great question. Actually, in 2003, when SARS broke out, China imposed a wildlife consumption and trade ban only for 2 months, and then it was quickly lifted. That's several different reasons why the trade ban was not imposed at that time, and why this wildlife wet marketing has gone on in the last 18 years. One of the major reasons was the Chinese government feared of job loss and GDP going down because
it's an economic issue. I totally understand that. But they have to have the animals slaughtered on site? They have to have them fresh? Is that why?
Well, wildlife wet marketing, accounted for only about 10% of all the wildlife animals, sent to the food market. So they slaughter the wildlife animals on site just to attract, attention, attract buyers.
Wow, unbelievable. All right, I mean, it's something that we're just not familiar with, but we're keeping an eye on it, obviously, because of the impact it's had all over the world. Dr. Li, thank you very much for your expertise.
Thank you.
Up next, Sleepy Joe and Donald Trump trade blows on China. And did his endorsement backfire?
He used to come up and reach in the pool and rub my leg down so it was straight, and then watch the hair come back up again.
The Biden campaign released an attack ad against President Trump this week. It said he was soft on China. I know, hilarious coming from Joe. Here's a taste.
Trump rolled over for the Chinese. He took their word for it. Trump praised the Chinese 15 times in January and February as the coronavirus spread across the world.
Tell the truth, Sleepy. Trump praised China in early days because he just signed $1 billion trade deal that you couldn't get done in 8 years. And now that the truth's out, he's called it the Chinese virus, launched an investigation, predicted lawsuits against the regime, and deployed warships to the South China Sea. What has Joe done besides babble from his library? Joe's softer than my pillow on China. He let him steal our jobs, factories, and technology, while the communists dumped fentanyl into our land and pumped his son full of money. Joe was dead wrong on the travel ban, left our PPE stockpiles empty, and said Trump was too slow. He was too slow, really? I guess Biden wouldn't have minded if Trump told America to shelter at home during Super Tuesday in February. Or as Joe calls it, Super Thursday. Now, that would have gone over pretty well, wouldn't it? But the best part about the ad is that it backfired. Democrats are calling Biden's China ad racist. Joining me now, Fox News contributor Dan Bongino. What do you think, Dan?
Permission to make an analogy? I've been there on the 5 with you. I know we need permission.
Granted.
So, you know what I'm talking about. So, listen, saying President Trump has been easy on China is like saying he's been easy on immigration. Like, did you miss his whole campaign?
Right.
Jesse, there were literally jokes made about it. How we remember China, how Trump pronounced it.
Yeah.
I mean, he mentioned China so much on his campaign. There were jokes about it. Like, did Joe Biden, did Sleepy Joe miss all that? Or has he just forgotten it all in his state he's in? I don't know, but this ad's going to go nowhere. No one actually believes that with Trump.
Yeah. I know. I mean, he's hapless down there in the library. He's doing the best he can. So the president didn't even need to spend any money on this ad. He just retweeted some meme kind of mocking Obama's endorsement of Joe. Watch this one.
He used to come up and reach in the pool and rub my leg down so it was straight, and then watch the hair come back up again. They'd look at it. So I learned about roaches. I learned about kids jumping on my lap. And I love kids jumping on my lap.
I just think that's a brilliant ad because it kind of gets right to the heart of the issue. Even Obama knows Joe's a joke.
So I've seen, you know what's hilarious? I've seen that ad no less than 50 times now, and it still cracks me up. This is the genius, though, right? Every single time. This is the genius of the Trump digital shop, though. Jesse, that's not even an official campaign. Notice, it doesn't have any paid for it. They just found that on Twitter somewhere because people were tweeting it. Set free. They made none of it. They did nothing. The effects aren't even that good. It's hilarious. They sent it out, and they have this thing go viral, and it costs them a big donut. It costs them nothing. Good job by the Trump campaign.
I know. All right. Well, speaking of donuts, we have some desserts up our sleeves. Nancy Pelosi thought it would be a good idea to basically shoot an episode of Cribs during a pandemic when 30 million Americans lost their jobs. She's up there with some fancy ice cream. I don't even know what this is. Watch this one.
Oh, my.
Chocolate, and then we have some other chocolate here. We just got it restocked, the ice cream.
You don't want to eat up everything all at one time.
You know, I just fire my strategist, you know, just kind of tap me on the shoulder and say, hey, you know, not a good idea.
You know, you wonder, we hear all the time about what a brilliant political tactician Nancy Pelosi is. This seriously may be one of the worst political campaigns, political ads for Nancy Pelosi I've ever seen. Even Meghan McCain, who, let's be honest, not a big fan of Donald Trump all the time, said, listen, this one's the kill shot. And you have to wonder, Jesse, like, who told Nancy Pelosi this was a good idea? Like, who was it who said, hey, Nancy, I got a great idea. You know, Americans are trying to feed their kids. It's one thing to live in a bubble like Pelosi. It's a whole other thing to advertise it and show the world literally how out of touch you are with your freezer that, Jesse, costs more than most Americans' cars. Whoever told her that was a good idea, you nailed it. Fire that person tomorrow, please. They were really awful.
I know. I think she had a brain freeze from all the pricey ice cream. Dan Bongino, thanks for checking in.
You got it.
All right. Our Villains of the Week segment returns. Everyone loves it. And it features The Squad. America made a significant scientific discovery this week. Bill Bryan is the Science and Technology Director at the Department of Homeland Security. And he's been in the lab since February studying the virus with a team from Johns Hopkins. He broke the news at the task force briefing.
Our most striking observation to date is the powerful effect that solar light appears to have on killing the virus, both surfaces and in the air. We've seen a similar effect with both temperature and humidity as well. And in the summer, we know that summer-like conditions are going to create an environment where the transmission can be decreased, and that's an opportunity for us to get ahead.
Bryan was very blunt. Now, going in the sun doesn't cure the virus. Enter our first villain. Washington Post reporter Phil Rucker. He spun it this way. This guy tells the president it's dangerous to share science with Americans.
After the presentation we just saw about the heat and the humidity, is it dangerous for you to make people think they would be safe by going outside in the heat, considering that so many people are dying in Florida, considering that this virus has had an outbreak in Singapore, places that are hot and are humid?
Here we go. The new headline is Trump asks people to go outside. That's dangerous. Here we go. Same old group. You ready? I hope people enjoy the sun. And if it has an impact, that's great.
Respectfully, sir, you're the president, and people tuning into these briefings, they want to get information and guidance and want to know what to do. They're not looking for rumors.
I'm the president, and you're fake news. And you know what I'll say to you? I'll say very nicely, I know you well. I know you well, because I know the guy. I see what he writes. He's a total faker. So are you ready? Are you ready? Are you ready? It's just a suggestion from a brilliant lab by a very, very smart, perhaps brilliant man. He's talking about sun, he's talking about heat, and you see the numbers. So that's it.
Now, Rucker's a chump. He's not there to report the news. He's there to skew it. Now, as an American, he should be thrilled with the new findings about sunlight. But he's angry, and he tried to sabotage the science just to hurt the president. This is a great example of why the president says fake news is the enemy of the people. You really can't trust a guy like Rucker. He doesn't have your best interests at heart. Look at this foul creature. Now, that boy could use some sunlight. It's a great disinfectant. Another wicked partisan poked their head out of the ground this week. A member of the squad, Ayanna Pressley, represents a district in Massachusetts. She accused the President of the United States of being a war criminal. Watch.
The virus does not discriminate by race, income, or immigration status, and neither should our relief efforts. This hurt is unprecedented. It is being felt by everyone, and the relief should be felt by everyone. So far as I'm concerned, what's happening with this administration, it's akin to war crimes. Criminal negligence, science denials, a sluggish response.
Pressley needs to point her finger somewhere else. She says Trump was slow. Trump locked down America on March 16th. Her state, Massachusetts, came after Trump. Actually, nearly 2 weeks after he came down. Now, 10 states locked down before her state did. And now, sadly, Massachusetts is top 5 in cases and fatalities. Sad. And just a week before the lockdown, Pressley held a big rally. There she is, not social distancing. The rally wasn't warning us about the virus either. It was about abortion. And we checked the record, and Pressley didn't say much of a peep about coronavirus in January, February, and March. And she hasn't said a single word about China. Oh, wait, except once, when she said calling it the Chinese virus was racist. I'm sure China's very pleased with Pressley's propaganda. And if she had her way, millions of Americans would be dead. Why? Because Pressley sponsored a bill in the House banning Trump from issuing travel bans. So millions of people in Wuhan would have flown directly to America, and the president couldn't have stopped it. What a dangerous woman. And if anybody is guilty of war crimes, Congresswoman, it's your friends, the Chinese communists. A second squad member is hurting America. AOC wants Americans to boycott going back to work.
When we have this discussion about going back or reopening, I think a lot of people should just say, no, we're not going back to that. We're not going back to working 70-hour weeks just so that we could put food on the table and not even feel any sort of semblance of security in our lives.
That's right. The Congresswoman is boycotting the economic recovery of America. Many Americans aren't getting paid. They need to work to eat. Other Americans are getting paid not to work. Now they know what it's like to be a member of Congress. But that's not what they want to do for a living. I'm not shocked that AOC's against jobs. She cheered when Amazon canceled jobs in New York. She cheered when oil prices tanked and energy workers lost their jobs. And her little Green New Deal, it pays people not to have a job. We're actually living the Green New Deal right now. Think about it. No air travel, people being paid not to work, and we just drastically cut industrial activity and emissions. So in 1 month, we spent a few $1 trillion and lost 30 million jobs and reduced emissions by just 6%. This is the real cost of AOC's Green New Deal. And if we keep going at this rate, not working, producing, or traveling for the next 10 years, we'll hit the temperature target of the Paris Climate Accord, destroying civilization so thoroughly that the world's temperature only rises 1.5 degrees Celsius. Oh, and while we're all broke and homeless, we'll have to pay more taxes. I hope we can all see what this green socialist scam costs. It costs everything, literally.